there's a level of wealth that once they reach it, they feel that the wealth controls them versus them controlling the wealth. And as the wealth accumulates for a family, we talked about the complexity arising. There are a host of family issues, succession planning issues. And the question is, if you might be the person that's pulling the strings, but are you doing it efficiently?
And we can't be a jack of all trades, right? It's not actually possible for anyone to be able to be an expert in any of these areas. So the coordinator, almost like a maestro.
I think it's the conductor of the orchestra.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like both the client and then the sidekick is the financial advisor doing the family tree of other advisors, right? And
the tax attorney might be doing something that the CPA might be working on, and they really haven't delivered everything in a coordinated fashion. So one might be running on something without a deadline, without a sense of urgency around it. But who's going to tell that you have to deliver your bit of the work in time for this other thing to happen?
So hello, and thanks for joining us today. I am Annika Nemera, a senior wealth strategist at NewEdge Wealth. And today with me, we have Herein, who is our partner or one of our partners here at NewEdge Wealth as well. Thanks for joining us, Herein.
Hey, Annika, how are you?
Doing well, thanks.
Good.
So today we're having this conversation because you wrote a white paper for us about the role of the family financial officer, kind of another way of looking at that maybe as the financial quarterback for your family. Am I describing that correctly? Can you kind of give us a couple sentences on what that means to you and then highlight for us the main themes you want to make sure we cover today?
So the reason that we came up with the idea of a family financial officer, which we call a quarterback in a sort of colloquial, is that we noticed that a lot of our clients in conversations would sort of express to us that there's a level of wealth that once they reach it, they feel that the wealth controls them versus them controlling the wealth. And going back years, it used to be if you had 20 million, then you had that sense, and maybe it's gone beyond that. Then you've got that sense where between having a family office and managing the wealth by yourself, there's a bit of a gap. And so we wanted to be able to address those concerns that our clients have had. So part of what the white paper was designed to do was to have people think about what that role would be and why they're not in the position to fulfill that role themselves.
All right. So it's, you mentioned complexity, like thematically, right? You mentioned complexity, and what other themes would you say we'll be covering today?
So we're going to be looking at why some of the traditional solutions that people have gone towards, why that hasn't worked, right? And then we'll also look at what the actual role would be of the family financial officer, what that quarterback does, for a family.
Awesome. So, what are some pain points? Because you talked about the complexity issue, and I think that's so important of they realize there's so much going on, and you said in your white paper, the wealth runs them, right? Instead of them running the wealth runs them, because you start kind of run around like a chicken with your head cut off saying, what do I need to work on next? And then something else flows up and you're on to the next fire. And so having that financial quarterback or financial family officer can really help fill that gap, right? So what are some maybe examples that you could share of where you've seen pain points for clients?
So if we think about what entrepreneur family, and this is mostly designed to address the concerns that our entrepreneur clients would have. They run their businesses and they do this in a very professional manner. And as they do that, they have a chief financial officer that helps address the capital issues, the reporting issues. How do you function, professionally, efficiently? And a lot of resources actually get devoted to that. You pay people quite a bit of money for that. And as the wealth accumulates for a family, we talked about the complexity, arising. And then you look at what the personal balance sheet looks like. There are a whole host of family issues, succession planning issues. And the question is, if you might be the person that's pulling the strings, but are you doing it efficiently? There are inheritance issues that are there. The planning isn't as coordinated and as well thought out as it could be. And just the administrative burden of taking all of your assets, the liquid assets, the non-liquid assets, the things that you're thinking about doing, the goals and plans, and putting them all together. And if you were running this as a business, you'd have someone do that for you. You'd have someone allow you to be proactive. And in the case of too many of our clients and too many of the entrepreneurs that we talk to, they are sort of on the back foot. The planning happens when something forces them to do that, and then they're reacting to situations which they're not prepared for. And so we have all this complex stuff that's happening on the personal side, and no one's managing it. Or if they're doing it, they're doing a real poor job, and they would all admit to it.
No, you're making a great point, and you have kind of a couple things in there that the family financial officer is really the corollary to the CFO that you might see in a corporate environment, right? Someone's running the money side to kind of oversimplify it, and you need that same type of thing, not just the investment management, but the coordination, right, of the financial life for the individual or the individual's whole family. So yeah, I love the way you structured that. And there's all these moving parts. I think that as clients and individuals become wealthier, right? And you mentioned like the 20 million was kind of an old number, and but it may still be the break point, and then it gets bigger from there as well. There's not really a bright line. It's a combination of assets overall and complexity put together. But it seems like I see themes that as one becomes more wealthy, time becomes more valuable than money, right? You have, think about it in kind of a regular person's life, and they might say, okay, can I afford somebody to mow the lawn for me? Can I afford someone to help it clean, once a month or something like that? This is kind of the same thing, right? Is you're just outsourcing some of these coordination tasks so they can spend the time that you can't get more of in other ways. Am I
It's
getting that
partly
right?
that, but the other part would be you're not equipped to figure out what the best entities and best structures are, for the
Mm-hmm.
family. So if you've done any planning, estate planning, as you're well versed in, requires that you do more than just think about it superficially. You have to have a plan and you have to execute the plan. And maybe the person who's doing it isn't best equipped to do it, and maybe they are. But is there someone that's really making sure that all the things that go along with it are being done? Is the execution happening? Is the execution being done in the most efficient manner? All of that has to happen, and someone needs to be in a position to create the momentum and to continue the focus so these things get done. And as we all know, the best laid plans, and then something happens.
You're so right. I think it's so much, and you made an excellent point. It's not just a simple task of assign this here, assign this here. It's we don't know what we don't know, and we can't be a jack of all trades, right? It's not actually possible for anyone to be able to be an expert in any of these areas. So the coordinator, I think I was thinking about this earlier, almost like a maestro, right? They're not the handyman jack of all trades. They're the maestro that's kind of puppet master over all of these different experts, not trying to be the expert because the client can't be the expert either, right? And just a matter of knowing a little bit enough about everything to be able to coordinate, be the maestro over everything. So
So you
great
say
points that you're
maestro, I
making.
think it's the conductor of the orchestra.
Yeah, exactly. The conductor of the orchestra. Exactly right. So we've talked about kind of the distinction between the corporate financial advisor and the family financial advisor and some of the areas that they're focusing on. And so much of this is around peace of mind when you really get down to it is that do they feel comfortable that they have a trusted advisor, right? Who can be the maestro, the conductor of the orchestra, where all of the people, all of your experts are players in the orchestra, but you have one person overall conducting it and making sure the trains are running on time, to mix metaphors. And it's what are some of the financial topics then that you would say that get covered by a financial officer like this?
Well, I think one of the things that we can transition to is the traditional solutions that people have turned to. And I think it's important, as we highlighted this in the white paper, that each family is very different, right? So they're like snowflakes, which is kind of the example that we're giving here. And so what has happened is some of the traditional providers, the private banks and some of the other large financial institutions, they don't really have what we consider to be the best and nimble solution to serve the needs of our clients. So if you take just an example that we give a big private bank, they might have a restricted investment pool where their solutions from an investment standpoint are only coming from what's available within their platform. And again, the same thing with the sales advice that they're given, that might be a bit constrained because they can only recommend what they sell within the platform. Or lastly, and you've experienced this, where you're dependent on the one firm's platform, or maybe that firm comes up short in terms of technology, or in a case where you might have experienced where they just don't have enough people doing the wealth strategy function within their firm, such that, and I experienced this in a big bank that we were in before, where one individual, as a trust and estates attorney, was responsible for the whole southeastern part of the country. And wow, how could you possibly give the level of attention necessary for a family to be able to do adequate planning. So we find that those traditional providers focus on what they do best, which is their own products and services. And then we're at the risk of, does that platform provide all the solutions that we need? And more often, the answer is no. So we replace that by having the maestro, the conductor, we call it the family financial officer or the quarterback, who is in a position to go to the marketplace, find the best solutions, find the best people, coordinate among them, and have a holistic plan that puts it all together and then executes on that plan. That's the other part of the role, which I think is super important to point out, is having a plan is great. We've gotten partway there, but are we tracking the execution? Are we making sure that everything ties together? So we start with Attica and the estate plan. That's great. We have it. But did we actually set up the trust? Did we fund the trust? Do we have a trust company we're working with that's going to be part of that, which is one part of it? Or if we know that there are borrowing needs, have we identified who the lender is going to be? Do we have the right terms? Did we sort of compete and get the best pricing? All those things are done, and who by, right? And we can't ask the principal or the founder of the business to run the business and do this at the same time.
You know, you're speaking my language, Ghislaine, because you're talking about all those planning things that I want to make sure that are getting buttoned up. Like, it's not just doing the estate plan, it's the follow through, right? I sometimes refer to this with clients as like the care and feeding of your estate plan, because it's not just, I buy the hamster and then you stick it in the cage and then you don't feed it and you don't clean the shavings or whatever. It's the same with an estate plan, and that's why this role is so important, is that you can set it up, but it is kind of a living and breathing thing. And that's not just, that corollary, that example works for estate planning, but it also works for their entire financial life, which is your point, right? It needs ongoing care and feeding, whether it's estate planning or the investment management or any of these topics. And you raised an important point earlier in this portion of our conversation around, look, we're in a relationship business, right? This is we want to make sure that people feel comfortable with whomever they pick as this trusted advisor to be this financial officer. But also the point you were making around resources. That's really what you're saying, right? Is what resources do they have? And are they limited by their resources or access to resources, or even to the extent of a conflict of interest, right? So if you have that proprietary products and proprietary investments, and you can pick from a smaller stable of opportunities, the individual might be doing their best. But if you've got, the blinders on, that you can't pick anything outside those blinders, there's an automatic limiting factor, right? And so I think that you make a great point, is, find the right person, but also make sure the person is working somewhere where they have sufficient resources and aren't limited to the point where there's sort of like a self-serving thing or a conflict of interest thing that is difficult to avoid. So I'm really glad you brought that point up. It's a key one. We've talked about where can we see gaps, right? And what, the resources, the proprietary issues, that kind of thing, making sure you're working in the client's best interests. We've talked about the complexity issues of why do you need someone like this in the first place? And so our third leg of the stool, I think, is what really would this person be working on? Where do you see some overlap or some areas where they can provide oversight and value?
So I think we have a slide again that illustrates this point, which is who's managing your wheel. So we see the financial quarterback as that person that would coordinate the work that all of these professionals that have to be there. So we talked about the orchestra. So clearly you've got to have the oboe section, the wind section. All of these are going to be put together, and who's going to coordinate how they function so that it all comes out, feeling great. And if you're the athlete, you think about this, who's going to play which position? So here we talk about the different roles, different individuals who need to be part of the relationship to professionally manage the wealth, the complexity of a family. So we have the financial advisor that would handle the investment piece of it, among other things, a CPA, a banker, a trust and estate attorney, a tax attorney, a corporate attorney, a lender, a valuation consultant. So this speaks to all of the people that we need to have sort of as part of our team. But again, a team needs a quarterback, a team needs a coach, a team needs a direction. It's got to be tied together. We can't just have everyone going off doing their own thing, which is typically what happens. So we have the tax attorney might be doing something that the a CPA might be working on, or vice versa. And they really haven't delivered everything in a coordinated fashion. So one might be running on something or working on something without a deadline, without a sense of urgency around it. But who's going to tell that you have to deliver your bit of the work in time for this other thing to happen? And a lot of things fall through the cracks, and the process becomes highly, highly inefficient. Again, who is managing your wheel? Who's minding the store? To use your analogy, who's making sure that the trains are running on time? And that's a key component, and we need someone to play that role.
I've seen so many examples of this. I mean, you use the example of like, the CPA might be doing one thing and the attorney something else or something like, and I've seen, it's almost like both the client and then as a, the sidekick is the financial advisor doing the family tree of other advisors, right? And I think that this oversight idea, and, you're talking about different people working in their own spheres. It's like if, I'll use myself as an estate planner by example, if I see someone's, whether it's a net worth statement or their will or some other thing they're trying to do on control or creditor protection, when you're a insert name of expert here, you're a hammer, everything's a nail, right? So when you're in your own expert area, you only generally look at the lens through your own expert area. How can my area solve this person's problems, no matter what they happen to be? And I think that's why this role is so important, is to back up a step and see where the overlap is, right? See the holistic viewpoint and coordinate. And I've seen so many examples of this. For example, there might be a business owner who's setting up a new LLC to be co-owned by maybe him and his family or her and her family. And the business corporate attorney is saying, I want to draft this LLC agreement to be very flexible and make sure that you can do whatever you need to do and lots of control. And the estate planning attorney is no, we need to draft this LLC to be super locked up and really inflexible. And by the way, I don't want you to be able to transfer ownership shares to anybody other than family, because then you get better valuation discounts for estate planning. So they're coming at this both with extremely legitimate perspectives, but for different purposes and reasons. And because of the person that pick, right, to do the drafting, it's ideal to have someone else saying, okay, well, what's the goal here, right? And what is more important to you? So, that type of thing is where you might see this coordinator help see the big picture. I've seen this as well with clients who, you might have an estate planning attorney who is a fantastic drafter, and we know a ton of fantastic attorneys. And you might see a net worth statement of $50 million. And the immediate thought, often by attorneys and also, planners or estate planners, is, okay, well, they have 50 million. They can absolutely make taxable gifts and give away, say, up to 30 million, because 50 million is a lot of money, right? But if they're spending 2 million a year and they're only 40 years old, well, wait a second, maybe it's not enough money, right? And so you have to look at the cash flow analysis based on the person's run rate, as well as their net worth, as well as their tolerance for lack of control, things like that. So it's all sort of a umbrella of looking at everything together and making sure that the left hand knows what the right is doing. And that is why you have this role, so that the client, right, doesn't have to worry about this all the time, and that the financial officer can help them look around corners.
One other aspect that we probably need to address is, let's talk about the next generation and the education of the next generation and the family dynamics that go along with that. And again, having someone who's a professional who understands these issues is maybe in a better position to transmit certain information to the next generation and to make sure that they're being educated to be taking on the role of a philanthropist, if that's what's required, or running the business, if that's what's required. But who's doing that? And maybe the principal, the patriarch or the matriarch of the family is not best suited to do that, to educate, because not everyone's a great teacher, or to basically delegate, because not everyone's in the best position to do that. So who does that? Who thinks about it? And who comes up with a plan? And we've seen situations where a really good, trusted quarterback will set up, along with the wealth strategist, along with the financial advisor, a whole program of education for the next generation, so they understand, or to do or help conduct a family values exercise, or to do family meetings, and then sort of construct them with guardrails, so it doesn't just become people pointing at each other, but we're heading in the right direction. Are we thinking about, are we going to have a family foundation down the road? Or is our family, because of its values, because of where the wealth was created, do we have a special responsibility to our community? And how do we express that? Again, this is the role that can be played, and it can be very broad. And I believe that as wealth becomes more complex and people have the complexity thrust upon them, and they wake up and they realize, oh my gosh, I have all these things to address, and it may become overwhelming. And if you're sort of put in that position, you sort of do nothing because you're paralyzed by all the stuff you have to do. And again, that's why we wrote this white paper, to have people think about this, where the wealth really does control you if you let it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ghislaine, so much for joining me today to talk about this topic. I think we've covered a lot of important ground. If you don't act, inaction is an action. So it's great to have a quarterback, maestro, conductor, family financial officer to help you out. And I really appreciate your time talking to us today about this topic. Thank you, Ghislaine.
Thanks, Annika. It was a lot of fun chatting about this, one of my favorite subjects with you.